The first would be, why should Democrats prefer you to Biden? And the second question is, what are your opinions on the Russia-Ukraine situation? So let's start with, if you don't mind, let's start with the Biden situation. Why should Democrats, they have an incumbent president, and why should Democrats prefer you to Biden?
Well, I mean, philosophically, we're at other, opposite ends of the party. President Biden believes in, the Ukraine war, which I think is I think it's a huge. What we're doing in the Ukraine now is just a massive assault on Ukrainians, and that we have trapped Ukraine in a proxy war against the Soviets, and they are being devoured by these geopolitical machinations of neocons in the White House who have this comic book depiction that, a lot of Americans have swallowed about, what is happening in the war, but what's really, and let me just say something about the war. I think Americans supported that war for all the right reasons because, Abraham Lincoln said we are a great nation because we're a good nation. I think Americans are good people. They have compassion toward Ukrainian people, an illegal invasion and brutal invasion by, a man who is a homicidal tyrant. And they saw and they have, tremendous admiration for the valor and the courage of the Ukrainian people. My son, Connor, at 26 years old, left law school without telling us and went to the Ukraine and joined the Foreign Legion and fought in a special forces group as a machine gunner during the Kharkiv offensive. And he was motivated by that goodness that so many Americans have. But we were told that this was a humanitarian mission. And yet every step that we have taken, every decision we have been made appears to have been intended to prolong the war and to increase the bloodshed. And President Biden has, recently confessed that our purpose is to depose Vladimir Putin, which is the 2-decade aspiration of the neocons who surround him. They've been saying that for decades. They've also been saying, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was their doyen and philosopher, said that the U.S. strategy should be to suck Russia into a series of wars in little countries where we can then exhaust them. Lloyd Austin, who is President Biden's defense secretary, in April 2022 said, our purpose for being in the Ukraine is to degrade the Russian army, to exhaust it, and degrade its capacity to fight anywhere in the world. Well, that is the opposite of a humanitarian mission. That is a war of attrition, and that's what it's turned out to be. We have now turned Ukraine into an abattoir that has devoured 350,000 young Ukrainians. They are lying about how many people have died. They're concealing it from us. They're concealing it from the Pentagon's concealing it from the American people. The Ukraine is concealing it from them people, but 350,000 people. Russians are killing Ukrainians at a ratio of 7 to 1. And we have turned that poor little nation into, just a killing field for these idealistic young kids. And in order to advance a geopolitical agenda that, has nothing to do with the Ukraine.
Okay, so it seems to me that your summary, from what I know, your summary of the rationale for the war is accurate, is that the hypothesis on the pro-war with Russia front, let's say, is that it's a worthwhile expenditure of American money to take Russia out as a conventional military power. And I do believe that's what's happening. And there's a side benefit to that, which is the funneling of billions of dollars into Eisenhower's military-industrial complex. And so
it's a money laundering scheme for the military-industrial complex.
Right. Okay. But now, so I could say, well, what's wrong with the goal of degrading Russia's conventional military policy? Why is that not in the best interests, let's say, of the West? And what do you see it as an alternative? And what would you do in relationship to the Russia-Ukraine conflict if you had, well, the the decision-making power to actually do something about it. I know there's no peace talks going on at the moment, for example, which is quite a miracle.
And the Russians have wanted to do peace talks from the beginning, and we've rebuffed them.
Right.
I will settle this on day one. I will stop the killing on day one. I'll stop the killing, and the settlement is obvious, right? The Russians have wanted to settle this from the beginning, and they've been very clear about what they want. They want NATO to make a pledge to not come into the Ukraine, which we should have done. We shouldn't have put NATO into 14 countries. We told the Russians when they dismantled the Soviet Union in 1991, and they moved 400,000 troops out of East Germany, and they allowed NATO to reunify Germany under NATO. And they said our condition for doing that, this tremendous conciliation that we're making, is that you never move NATO to the east. And George Bush told them, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. And in 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski laid out the plan, which has then happened, where we moved it not 1 inch, but 1,000 miles to the east, 14 nations, and then we put Aegis missile systems in Poland and Romania, which are nuclear capable. So they're a few minutes from Russia. They can decapitate the entire Russian leadership before, if we wanted to start a preemptive war. And that is inexcusable. I mean, we wouldn't live with that. My uncle did not live with that in 1962. We would have gone in. If they hadn't removed them from Cuba, we would have gone in. And then we overthrew the democratically elected government, Viktor Yanukovych, in 2014. We spent $5 billion. The CIA through USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy spent $5 billion to violently overthrow that government, and which was democratically elected. So we destroyed this democracy and put in our own government, which we now know the neocons in the White House, Victoria Nuland, selected 2 months before in a telephone. So we handpicked the new government before the coup. We put a new government in that immediately makes a civil war against the Russian population of Donbass, bans the Russian language, kills 14,000 of them, and then starts training with NATO. And there were a lot of provocations. It's not just me saying this. George Kennan, who is the architect of, the entire Cold War containment policy, said in 1998, the year after Brzezinski wrote that memo, he said, it is the greatest calamity ever to expand NATO to the east. He said, Russia lost the Cold War. The people who are running Russia are the ones who oppose the Cold War. We should be making friends with them. We shouldn't be pushing them into the hands of China.